All right, everybody, hello. And to those that will look at this recording later, hello to you too. I am Womack. Once again, I'm the incoming CS president. We have a speaker here for you today, Mr. John Rumion. You will see him pop up here on Discord in a moment. He will be Yamamushi, is his Discord name. So this is just basically a nice chill Q&A session, so you have a chance to ask a professional in the field, what's it like? How do you get that job? What are you worried about? Like, what might be certifications that you want to get? Anything you can think of, this is an opportunity for you to ask someone. We have some questions prepared that we're going to ask him, and we'll go through the list. And after that, if y'all have any questions, we'll field it to him, as well as if anyone puts questions in the Discord, we'll field it to him. Yes. If you want to, for some reason, write some questions in the Discord channel, feel free. Just get on Discord through one of the website or your phone app and put them on there as well. That's an option. But we are going to begin. Mr. Yamamushi, or sorry, Mr. Rumion, can you hear me?
You can just, it's Rumion.
Okay.
It doesn't have to like rhyme with the John. Everyone wants to.
You're a little quiet.
Everyone wants to make it rhyme with John.
So, would you like to tell us about yourself for a moment?
Yeah, so let's see. I work for Zoom right now.
I work for Zoom right now. I've been at Zoom for the past year. Before Zoom, I was at many other places. I worked for a video game studio before Zoom. Before that, I was at a place called F5 Networks. Before that, I was at Atlassian. I worked for Hewlett Packard. I worked for about 2 years in Switzerland. Working on cryptocurrency projects, like back in 2014. So I was around in Bitcoin way back in the early days.
I don't know. What do you want to know?
What?
Yeah, I don't know. What do you want to know?
Let's start off with like the basic. What is it like working for Zoom?
I think it depends on what you do for Zoom.
I think it depends on what you do for Zoom. For what I do at Zoom, I work from home. And having a remote job, period, is very nice. It has its stressful days. It has its not stressful days. Working from home has its own challenges.
And has its upsides, it has its downsides. There are things you get.
Has its upsides, it has its downsides. There are things you get, I suppose, from being in an office if you're more of a social kind of person. And if that's not super important to you and you can just focus on work, then working remotely is awesome.
There are busy weeks, there are not busy weeks, there are some weeks.
But, there are busy weeks, there are not busy weeks. There are some weeks where, everyone's like breathing down your neck. There's other weeks where nothing is happening, it feels like.
Oh. Yes, Matt.
Yeah, this is Matthew. So for Zoom, I guess they offer like positions that are completely remote. Like you don't ever have to go into the office, I guess, or you have to go in every now and then.
Yeah. It depends on what you do. I would say
it depends on what you do for Zoom. I would say most of the programming type jobs, anything IT related, etc., they're all going to be remote now. I think more of the business end type stuff is in person, or perhaps marketing. It's weird. Like companies talk about this hybrid work
model, and it varies between teams. Some teams, everybody is located in the same city, and so they require them to come in 1 or 2 or 3 days a week, whatever, for meetings, or they just need to have a presence in the office. Other teams, like mine, we're all over the United States, and to have us come into the office would be unfeasible, or they'd have to move us all somewhere, or get rid of
all of us, which I don't see any of those happening.
So since you're from home, what does like the average day look like? Do you like log in, get stuff done? Like how does that actually?
We do something called stand-up. We do like the whole SCRUM project management, etc. Type meetings. We do SCRUM meetings every morning. We basically talk about what we worked on the day before, what we're going to work on today, anything we're blocked on. It's basically just a quick status update with the team. Throughout the day, depending on the day, there may be sporadic meetings spread out. things that are just scheduled from week to week. I'm kind of in a unique team wherein I have meetings that sometimes will go on until 10 or 11 o'clock at night because they are with China, and China does not come into the office until it's 6:30, 7 o'clock my time, and things just happen that way. But not every company is like this that I've been at. The last company I was at was a video game studio, and I was full remote with them. It was also the beginning of COVID when I started working for them, so it was perfect timing to start working for a video game studio in Paris. And they had a studio in Montreal, and we have to have meetings with people in Paris, and it would be 3 a.m. my time. So it really just depends.
Okay, all right. So that's got Paris, and we go at 3 a.m. for you. That sounds unfortunate. So you listed like a large number of multiple companies over the course of your career. What was the usual reason that made you decide to switch from a company? And when would you suggest switching out of a company?
At first it was really hard. The first company I worked at was a hosting company called Rackspace. I worked for them for 7 years. And after 7 years of being somewhere, it was on site. And I think something that you don't really realize when you go to work for a company is that, and I'll kind of flip this around too, like what I look for when I want to go to a company and why it's hard to leave a company. When I go to a company, like you're going to be around these people all the time. You're going to see them more than your family. You're going to hear their voice more than you hear anybody in your family's voice. That's just part of working somewhere. And in turn, they to me become kind of an extension of family. They're not, real family members, but for all intents and purposes, like these are people that you're around all the time and communicate with, and seeing the same people and the same faces basically every night for 7 years solid, it was really hard for me to make the decision to leave somewhere. But I saw the writing on the wall for myself. I knew at the time there was no more room for growth for me in what I wanted to do. I was getting bored with what I was doing, and there were better opportunities coming at me. And all of those things happening at once, like I had to leave. It was like a 50% pay increase, my first jump. And that to me was like a windfall of money at the age I was at to get that much more money and to have more freedom to do things. And I suppose when I leave a company, one of the primary things is that I'm bored with what I'm doing. If I don't enjoy what I'm doing, and I would say this for anybody, like why are you doing it? Money is great, but at the end of the day, like if you're not doing something that makes you happy, what's the point? You only live once, so why be miserable? And this kind of goes into an extension too, where 40, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, people would join a company like IBM or Hewlett Packard, and they would be there for life, if not half their lives. I was at Hewlett Packard with people who were there for 30 years, and that is insane to me. Why? We don't have that kind of mentality anymore in tech. Like, we jump ship, we go places. We don't have to stay somewhere for 10, 15, 20 plus years. Like, if you don't feel like you're getting anything out of the company you're at and you're bored, why not look for something better? There's no harm in having LinkedIn and like having, that little button click for open to new offers. And who knows, you might not get any emails for a while, or suddenly, you just start getting a trickle of emails or little, things from recruiters that are just interested. Sometimes, a lot of the times you'll have recruiters that reach out to you with jobs that are not interesting whatsoever. But you might want to start that, open communication with them or build that relationship with them where later on they may have a job that comes to them that is interesting for you, and you know them and you have that relationship built with them. And I've gotten 2 jobs that way. In fact, my job at Hewlett Packard was a weird one. I was playing a game called EVE Online, which I'm sure some of you know, and my recruiter also played EVE Online, and it turned out like the night before we had our first phone call, we'd actually been in a fight with each other from opposite sides of that battle, and yeah, we just became friends that way, and the next day I knew I was working at Hewlett Packard. I mean, I could talk about all sorts of reasons about why I left a company. I wouldn't say it's like any specific, like every single time it's the same thing, but you know, it's like the straw that breaks the camel's back. After so long, you just want to do something better.
All right, thank you for that. And thank you for the anecdote for that any MMO player remembers. So if we have to go back to that then, just for a moment, because you talked about you only stay at a company as long as it's interesting. If the job's interesting, which company was, I guess, for you interesting the longest?
So I really liked the last company I worked at. It was a video game studio. There's a really long story as to why I started working for them. But after many years of being a fan of this video game, in particular, I finally got the opportunity to go work for them. And I think the reason I enjoyed it the most is the amount of responsibility that I had. The breadth of things that I could work on or have to fix on any given day or hour or whatever. That's what kept it interesting to me, that it wasn't the same monotonous, these are the tasks that you're given every week and this is what you'll do. I mean, sometimes I enjoy that. Sometimes I enjoy being given like a plate of work for 2 weeks and this is what you will do over the next 2 weeks, and as long as it's done within the 2 weeks, cool. But the more creative side of me likes the more freedom. Like, things are broken, why are they broken? Oh, I have full access to go figure out why they're broken. I can dive into it. Or, you know, just being bored and it being like 2 in the morning and perhaps I had a few drinks and I'm going through the support queue and I'm like, oh, like support will never be able to fix these things, but I know how to fix them. So just jumping in and like, I really enjoyed that. Just having the freedom to go and fix and do things and build things. Now there are other reasons that I've enjoyed a job that aren't necessarily tied to the work. I really enjoy working in cryptocurrency. I have pictures of me hanging out with basically the core original Ethereum dev team, and like I have memories of like going on bike rides with them at night and going and drinking and singing karaoke, and that would have never happened had I not had the opportunity to go to Switzerland in the first place to go work on cryptocurrency projects. Like, the work itself wasn't that interesting to me at the end of the day, the things that I specifically worked on. But getting to meet all those people and network with all those people, that was the best part.
Okay, thanks for that. So we're going to switch up a little. We're going to go to probably the question everyone kind of asks about. How did you get that all-important first job?
Let's see. I was 18. I had a little bit more of my background. I actually graduated from college when I was 17, so I had a little bit of a head start. But I was 18, and I had applied to this company, Rackspace. I had applied to another couple of computer companies, like not computer companies, but doing computer work for companies, and it just wasn't really the kind of stuff that I wanted to do. Like, one of them was literally IT, like help desk, like fixing printers, and I just didn't see myself wanting to do that. At the time, I was like, I will take any job, like anything on my resume will help me. Also, I needed to eat, so things like that. But with Rackspace, I went in, I did the interview, and then I never heard back. And I don't recommend anybody do this, but I proceeded to call them every single day for a month solid. And I didn't hear anything back, still didn't hear anything back. And about a month afterwards, I was on Rackspace's website, and they had one of those live chat windows that popped up. And I just started chatting with the sales guy there, and I was like, I want a job at Rackspace. Like, this is what I do, blah, blah, blah. Like, I just graduated, I really want to do this. And it turned out that his wife was director of, I guess what you would call like the Linux side of the house for their enterprise team. And the next day I got a call and I had the job offer. So Yeah, it was about persistence in that one. It was about basically, I wanted a job, and I knew that was a job I could get, and that I was perfectly qualified for, and I just kept hounding them until I got it.
Okay. I mean, yeah, persistency is great. It's something everyone needs to learn. So thinking about that, about actually qualifications, what certifications would you recommend pursuing? Because like we've heard like Security Plus, we've heard of Amazon Web Services. Are there any certifications that you would like beat the drum over?
Well, I will put it this way. When I have a resume in front of me, I never look at a certification, ever. It depends on what you're going to do, though. If you are going into anything like networking, if you're going to be working on, I don't mean, how do I put it? If you're going to be doing some deep, heavy networking stuff, if your plan one day is to be touching the backbone of the internet and be doing border gateway protocol stuff, you probably want Cisco certifications. Otherwise, they don't matter. Don't get an A+, that's a waste of time. Security Plus, I've never seen that one come up in a resume. I'm sure people have told you maybe Amazon Web Services. It depends on what you're going to do. If your goal is to maybe go into DevOps type work, maybe learning some of the fundamentals behind Amazon Web Services stuff is important. Well, I would say definitely important. But getting the certifications is not so important. What we really look for, and this has been every place I've ever worked, is experience. No, the resumes are great and all, but it's more about having it. This is going to be more difficult since you guys don't really have jobs yet, and like you're going to be looking for tech jobs. It's about having maybe like a portfolio, even like a GitHub full of random projects or things that you've worked on. Just showing that you know how to build and put things together shows a lot, and it shows a lot of initiative too. Like, it's one thing to say I have an AWS certification. It's another to say I built this website that hosts. I can't think of a random app. Like I built this Spotify clone that hosts maybe like 100 songs on it, but it's running on an AWS backend, and I automated it with Terraform, and I did all this stuff. Like being able to show that you know those things is more impressive than saying I have a certification in a thing. So every time a certification's been put in front of me, it's been a sales pitch, and they cost a lot of money. And the only certification I've ever had was a Red Hat enterprise certification, and that is only because the company paid for it. So, yeah, people may tell you you need certifications. I wouldn't necessarily lean too heavily on that. It's not very important at all.
All right, thank you. That was the exact kind of answer I was wanting to hear. Or at least was interested to see what it would be. So you mentioned DevOps, and an issue we have actually at the college is, what is DevOps? Should I consider it as a CS major? Is it like what exactly does it entail?
So it's going to be different at every company what DevOps does, and their focus. What you're going to be tasked with is going to be different in any given company. There's going to be some core set of knowledge, like a bit of core set of knowledge you should know, like AWS fundamentals, what an instance is, what various services are, like EC2 and S3, and like why do you need cloud storage, how to automate that with Terraform. 99% of the time it's going to be Terraform that ties it all together. DevOps is, as the name implies, is supposed to be a mix of development and operations, but it's not totally black and white there. It's, I work with people who are more heavily developer focused, and I work with people who are more heavily operations focused. And I would say at the end of the day, like what our purpose is to make code ship out faster, and to be able to spin up environments very quickly for people. It's been many years since DevOps has not been in the picture, but I would say about 2015, I worked for a company that had never done DevOps type work, and I don't know if you guys are using Git. Hopefully, you guys are using some version control. But at the time, they used something called SVN, and in Git, you can create different branches. Cool. You can merge features between these branches. You merge your branches back into your master branch. You track all of your work that way. Everything is in one nice clean master branch at the end of the day, so that when you build something, you ship from that one master branch. The company that I had gone into had 24 different branches for 24 different customers, and they had diverged so much over time that it was almost impossible to ever merge all of these different changes into one main master branch again. It took them 2 days, what they would call branch days, and those were the days at which they were supposed to cut the features and then build a working version of the software and then ship to the customer. And it would take them 2 days to do that, and that's insane. Whereas, somewhere like Zoom, if we push out a new feature, I think it takes me maybe 30 minutes, and that's only because I'm waiting on the latency of internet and I'm waiting on maybe a server to spin up. Or, sometimes they can take an hour because there's a little bit more work involved. But being able to do things very quickly and roll out changes, especially in what we call the web scale world or the web world, where not every company you work at is going to have the scale of Zoom. I think Zoom is Amazon's biggest customer right now, and not many places you're gonna work at are gonna be that big. But you may eventually end up working somewhere that is a web company or wants to be quote unquote web scale, and you're going to, if you go into DevOps, you're gonna need to know like auto scaling, for example, why auto scaling exists, with the different types of auto scaling. You kind of need to understand some software development, and I know that this question probably was on the list as well. Like, does DevOps involve a lot of programming, or is it really more scripting? And again, that is something that is different at every company. Most of the time, it's going to be mostly scripting, and the development is going to be more focused around that automation, that terraform. I would highly recommend anybody learn terraform. You can use it for things like AWS or Docker or all sorts of cool things you can do with Docker or with Terraform. But yeah, I would say most of the development time goes into things like automation and Terraform and maybe Python to like build tools that kind of tie all these bits of automation together. However, I say that, on the other hand, this time last year for Zoom, what I was working on is we needed to ship a SDK out to basically a bunch of different teams. And each group used their own programming language. C++ is heavily used in Zoom, so is Java, a little bit of Go, JavaScript, Python, Lua, Erlang, C#, C, and probably a few others. But we needed to ship out one SDK, and we needed to support every single one of these teams because they were all going to be required to use this SDK. It was part of a security thing we were doing. But how with a team of 4 people, how could you ever manage 10 different programming languages like that and support that many groups of different people? And so what I was working on was I wrote an SDK in Go, and then I would export that SDK to C from Go, and then from C I would re-import that into 10 other languages with wrappers, and then that's how we would support 10 different teams. Now, or not teams, 10 different languages. Now, would 99% of people working in DevOps ever do that? No. Did I ever think in my DevOps career that I would ever have to touch C++ again? No. But I enjoyed doing it. And I think that's kind of like the crux of finding a good DevOps job is A good DevOps job is one where you will kind of be focused into the thing that you enjoy doing. You know, some people really like operations and automation work. So here at Zoom, those kind of people tend to end up with those tasks more often. They're good at it, they enjoy doing it, so that's the work that they're given to do. I myself, I like development work, so I tend to get more of the devy type task. Just not to say we don't like have everyday tasks that come to us. Yeah, that's a long-winded answer, and you still probably don't know anything DevOps does.
It's still something though. It's better than nothing, which is what we've currently got. So we appreciate that.
DevOps is kind of like being jack of all trades. You don't have to be a master at anything. You just have to know enough about everything to be able to put things together. And I would say one of the core skill sets of somebody good at DevOps is how to Google. How to go and find the answer to something. I might not know the answer to something, like even programming. Like I might not know all the answers all the time. Like nobody could possibly do that. Like, but it's being able to go and find out how to do something, and perhaps many different ways of doing something, and knowing enough to weigh the pros and cons of any given method, and to implement something. Can you put something together? DevOps people don't necessarily always have the same background, but they all kind of have the same attitude about things. We enjoy building things.
All right, thank you for that. So I guess a question that we can lead off of from that is, what are some software tools that you use to build these things?
So things like Terraform, so I'll just go down a list. Terraform, Packer, there's going to be a cloud provider that's either going to be AWS, it's going to be Azure, it could be Google. Most of the time it's going to be Azure, AWS. There are Google companies out there, but I would say as long as you have one of them under your belt, the rest of them all the concepts will be translatable easily amongst all of them. Know a programming language. Go is generally used a lot nowadays, and Python is not going anywhere anytime soon. Those type of scripty type languages are good in DevOps. Also knowing the in and outs of an operating system, either Windows or Linux. It's generally going to be more Linux leaning on the back end for most stuff. Let's see. A question that may come up in any DevOps interview, or perhaps I would say a lot of dev interviews, maybe web development interviews, networking type interviews, but a question that you're going to get at some point is, when you go to open your web browser and you type in google.com, what happens? What happens behind the scenes to make Google load? If you can understand those concepts and be able to go in like great detail about that, I would say that you would fit perfectly in DevOps.
All right, thank you for that. Since you mentioned interview, we actually have a lot of questions involving that. So let me find one of the first. How were all your interviews at all these different jobs? Were there coding problems? And if so, what was the difficulty level? And let's start with those two questions and then we'll move on.
I've had good interviews and I've had really terrible interviews, and I've not gotten every single job I've interviewed at. That would be a miracle. So it really depends on what that company is doing and what they're looking for. Generally, though, you will get some, for DevOps, I will get infrastructure type questions, or I'll be posed a problem with X thing is broken, or X behavior is being exhibited. What would you do to go investigate? And what kind of tools would you use to investigate? Like, some questions might be, there's memory, like you get an alert that memory is running high on a server. what would you do to go investigate, and how might you fix the problem for the future, etc. You also get sometimes, what do you call them, more vague questions, like what I like to ask is, where do you go for help? And most people will say Google. That's going to be everybody's first response. But the answer that I'm actually looking for is my coworkers, my peers, because what I'm looking for is somebody who's not afraid to say when they don't know something and isn't afraid to ask for help. And yeah, just being honest about that is a big part of an interview. Let's see. Every company I've had has given me a programming interview. Some have been like whiteboarding interviews. Some programming interviews, like I had C++ ones that weren't actually writing C++. They were just asking me like, parts about the C++ standard language or standard library. They would ask me like things like, tell me the difference between the heap and the stack. Tell me a little bit about C++'s object model. More vague, not vague isn't the right word, but less hands-on type questions and more just, do you know how C++ works? Here at Zoom, I had my interview. I used Go, and the interview was effectively going to a website and retrieving some JSON and doing something with that JSON. I give all the programming interviews on my team, and they're all basically that. You can use any programming what I tell my candidates are, you can use any programming language that you want. You can use any books, you can use Google, you can use Stack Exchange, copy paste. That doesn't really matter to me. What I am looking for is, do they know how to solve the problem, and do they know, if they go looking on Google, I don't care that they go searching how to do something on Google. It's what did they go search on Google to find that answer? Like, do they know how to go look for the information, and do they know how to take that information and piece it together to build said thing that I want them to write? The way I give interviews is going to be different than a lot of other people. Some people are insane and don't let you use web searches, etc., to find things. You're going to get a lot of questions, a ton of programming interview questions that have absolutely nothing to do with the work you're going to be doing. And those are jobs that I would stay away from anyways. You're going to be tasked with things like, write me a stack in C, and your job will have to absolutely have nothing to do with that whatsoever. Like here in DevOps, if I get a question, it's like, write me a poker game using whatever language that you want. Like, what does that have anything to do with DevOps work? I try to ask things that are more relevant to the work that we're going to be doing. Like, so when I ask people to go to a website and search for JSON and fetch the values out of it and sort them and do something with those values, like that's generally the kind of work they're going to be doing in DevOps. They're going to be talking to an API, and do they know how to get a response out of the API? Do they know how to interpret that and do something with the response? Like, that's it may sound easy to some of you, but it would surprise you how many people cannot do that.
All right, thank you for that. So the lead off of that, and some of those like weird interviews, what helped you through those interviews? Was it energy drinks? Was it lead code? Was it sheer grit? Like what did it take for you to get through them?
So if I'm, this is probably going to be bad advice, or maybe good for some of you, but what I generally do is, if I really want a job, like when I was applying here to Zoom and I wanted the job at Zoom, I actually applied at about 10 other places, and I did 4 or 5 other interviews beforehand to practice for the one that I wanted.
What?
I don't know if that's good or bad advice, because it may be hard enough to just land one interview. But maybe that kind of falls into the bucket of don't kind of put everything into one pile. Like, don't put all your hopes into one basket. Have some options. Like, get several interviews all lined up, because one might not go well. But you don't have to beat yourself up over it, because the next one you'll be like, oh, I'm prepared for this. You may have interview questions that are posed to you where, like, that first interview, you don't know the answer, and you realize I should probably learn this or know this, and then you learn it, and the next day comes along and you have an interview and they ask you something very similar, and you kind of already know the answer. It's a bad way of practicing, and perhaps you are wasting companies' time, but
It worked for you.
yeah. Yeah.
I have a question.
At the end of the day, if you work for any of these people, they're gonna act like they own you, no matter who they are. It's just how companies work. So, might as well take a little bit of their time too.
Okay, we have a question from Matt Briss.
Yeah. What would you have done if you actually did well in one of those interviews that you were practicing with? Would you just have denied the job?
Then you end up with multiple offers, and you get to choose the best one. So I guess that would be the worst case scenario. Or you just say, thanks, but I'm not interested. It's actually very difficult to say no to somebody when they've made you an offer and you realize it's not that good, or you have a better offer. Like, I don't know, maybe that's just my personality, but it's hard to disappoint people for me, and I just feel bad when I tell people, nah, I changed my mind. So, yeah, it's kind of situational. I saw there was a question from Chelsea here about whether or not I have ever had imposter syndrome. Yes, like constantly. Constantly. When you get into any high-paying tech job, you're going to be wondering, like, for me, it's little things that happen. Like, I'll be on an airplane and I start to think, why do I get paid more than the guy that's flying this airplane? That doesn't make any sense. Or like, just little things like that just start to add up, and then it kind of boils up into like, wait, like, do I have any skills? Why am I doing this thing? Or sometimes it'll feel like something is very easy to you, and it seems very easy to you, but maybe very difficult for someone else. And because it seems easy to you, you're like, anybody could do this. Why am I the one doing this? How did I get here? Did I deserve to be here? But at the end of the day, they did interview other people, and you're the one that got in. And you may have, bad days, good days. You may have days where you fall behind on work and all of that, and all kind of, you have anxiety. I think that's just part of life, in a way. At Atlassian, we legitimately had meetings every few months to talk about imposter syndrome. Like, they recognized that was a real thing that was happening to people. So, yeah, I think if you don't have it, if you don't question yourself, you're not human. that's not normal. That maybe even leads back into the boredom question. Like, if you're somewhere where you feel so overconfident that you're bored, like, maybe you should go somewhere where you're around people that are, that you feel are way smarter than you. And imposter syndrome can be good in that way. Like, I feel like the people I work with, people with master's degrees are way smarter than me. But there are days where I'm sure they feel I'm way smarter than them too. Like, I might know something they might not know. So I wouldn't take, it is something that is real. It's just not something that should be career ending for you. I wouldn't let it get you to the point where you're like, I don't want to work in computers anymore. I want to go live in Alaska, live off the land or something. Like, you don't have to go that far.
All right, thank you for that. And let us all hope we do not become survivalists in Alaska. So actually, this ties in for about 5 minutes ago, but I still think it's a good question. So you were talking about having multiple buckets ready to go, if I remember right. So what other jobs should people consider while trying to start out in the tech field?
Yeah, I mean, your first job doesn't have to be Google or Amazon or a giant company. Like, the first job that I had was, like I said, a company called Rackspace, and I worked night shift for 7 years solid, and I loved it. It was very stressful, and it was very stressful being 18 and being in a company like that with a bunch of people who had been working on this stuff for decades even. I was like a huge Unix nerd. Like I had built, I had like rebuilt a PDP-10 and stuff in high school. Like I was super Unix geek, and when I first started at Rackspace, like I was super nervous. But then I got to work with people that were who'd worked on all that stuff, like in the 70s and 80s, and yeah, I think I found myself in a very unique starting job situation. But there are tech jobs like that you might not have all the experience you need right away, but that you could easily like gravitate towards, like learn some Linux systems administration and how to set up, how to do web hosting on a Linux box, and generally could get into most web hosting companies. I know everybody has like different motivations for why they look for a particular job, but it's hard to say, or it's hard to believe that money isn't everything, but you should weigh your happiness regardless into it, or regardless into the whole array of choices that you have. Again, you should not do work for people that are going to make you miserable, and just because you feel like it's your only choice. Like there are tons of places that are constantly hiring people, and web hosting might not sound that glamorous, but web hosting is a huge door into all sorts of stuff in tech. And how do I put this? When I first started at Rackspace, it was a small web hosting company. There were maybe 2,000 people at the company, so it was small by some people's metrics. But it was still small enough, and it was still a private company. And what that meant was at night, some guys would bring in coolers of beer, and we would drink beers all night. And we'd do work, and we'd work all night, and we'd drink beer. And in the morning, someone would carry out the trash bag of beers. And yeah, it was like that kind of stuff that happened. It was like not really startup, but it was still that kind of startup feel where you're kind of left alone to do your own work, and everybody's an adult and just doing their own thing. And you won't find that at a place like Zoom. Not to say that I would, roll back the clock and go work for Rackspace again. Like, no time has passed that I would not do that. But yeah, like maybe going and working for a small startup or a small little tech company or whatever will make you happier. Maybe you won't gain the right experience quick enough or whatever, but it all comes back to what makes you happy at the end of the day. Like it doesn't have to be Amazon or Netflix or Google or whoever. It can be any small tech company, as long as you're getting some experience and working. Like, again, people who are doing interviews generally are looking for experience over everything else.
Thank you for that. Happiness, actually, I agree with that coming first. We do have a question from the audience.
Yeah, so I have an internship at a web programming company. What is the most important thing, in your opinion, that I can be getting out of it? And I don't know if this makes sense, but what's the most important thing my resume can be getting out of it?
Collaborating, working in a team, being able to do web development like in a team setting. And they're probably going to do like something like SCRUM, or like you're given these tickets or tasks or whatever they want to call them over an arbitrary amount of time. Some people do week-long sprints, other people do 2-week-long sprints. But yeah, I think the most valuable thing you can learn out of that is that. like how to work in a team setting, doing web development in a group setting, and how they manage that, like the project management behind that. You'd be surprised how many people go into web development and then find out they like the project management way more. So.
All right, thank you. This is from Joel in Discord. He asked this actually a couple days ago. Do you have any, wants to ask, do you have anything to say about the recent Zoom vulnerabilities?
It was the zip bombing.
Was
I
this
think he
the
wanted-
bombing?
Yeah, zip bombing vulnerability. I guess he was wanting to know if like he had any.
No, because I don't work on any of that stuff.
Okay.
I don't know if you use Zoom. When you open up Zoom, there's a little, depending on if you're on an end-to-end encrypted call, there's a little green like shield check mark icon that'll show up in the top left corner. That's what I work on. I work on end-to-end encryption for Zoom, and I'm currently working on a new end-to-end encryption. I don't know how you would describe it. Just a new end-to-end encryption platform for our internal services. But no, I don't know anything about the vulnerabilities. I did actually open up that link that was on the questions, and I went looking through them to see if like any of it sounded familiar. But I don't work on client development, and our backend services are all like video might be a backend service. That might be like a whole group of 100, 200 people working on that. Luckily, I don't have to do any of that. DevOps is great because you manage code, but you don't have to write a lot of code.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. This is a question I guess I have. What do you do for self-learning? Because you mentioned that a couple of times, like go learn this and then build something in portfolio so you can present it. What do you choose to do to get that info?
I like building things, and I like when something that I am working on in a personal capacity meshes well with something that I'm doing in a professional capacity, and where perhaps I'm given a task at work that is similar or that will help me in something that I'm doing in my own personal work, and so I'll be more interested in like finishing my own personal project, but in turn that comes back to having the experience to finish the work task. I also have weird gaming hobbies, and I like things like Dwarf Fortress, and so I will come up with,
Do you know what that is?
I know what that is.
not very smart projects. Like I decided to write a 3D engine for the
What?
command line that used incurses to output 3D objects. Like why would that ever come in?
What?
Nobody would ever need to use that. That would come in. That would help nobody ever. But I wanted to do it, and I learned a ton while doing it. I learned more math than I ever wanted to know doing it.
That's true.
But yeah, I just have weird personal projects that come up, or perhaps something comes up that I think will be easier if I automate it, and then I have some new programming task ahead of me. I think that's more important for me, is that I keep up my programming skills. Like sometimes weeks will go by where I never open my IDE and have to write a line of code. But I like to keep those skills up by I might think of a way these things have already been solved, but it might be like I want to stream audio from a YouTube stream in real time and then output that out to a Discord bot and then stream it in Discord. What would be required to do that? And then I like putting those things together, and they might not help anybody ever, but there's still things that keep my skills up, and I'm still learning something new every time that I try one of these random projects. I don't like to be bored. I don't know if that's that's not a skill that people can be taught, but I don't like to have times where there's just nothing happening. I like to always be working on something. So if it's not something on the computer, it's something in my personal life, or making music, or doing something with my hands around the house. But yeah, that translates back into computer work with random projects. There's no like, I would never tell anybody like go buy a Udemy course just to keep up, like to constantly learn new things. Like,
Oh man, I feel
find a problem in which you
I
can
just
solve that
bought 2
problem
Udemy
using
courses.
the thing that you want to learn, and then eventually you'll learn that thing well enough
wrong?
that you'll have solved that
I just bought
problem.
like 2 Udemy courses.
And then time will pass, and you'll come back to that original problem, and you'll say, wait, that was dumb, why did I solve it that way the first time around? And you'll learn more, and you'll just redo it sometimes, or know how to rebuild something better. Actually, I would say if you want a job in security, the thing that I would most recommend is not getting a certificate or going to training or anything like that. What you should do is go somewhere like DEF CON. Go to a conference and meet people, network with people that way. DEF CON, I would say, is the best one because it's the quote-unquote largest hackers conference on earth. Most of the people that show up are all going to be government. You'll find a lot of people that are looking for interns. You'll find people that have no interest in getting jobs and just have weird random skills like lockpicking, or you'll learn all sorts of random things, and you might find a new interest in something that you want to spend a lot of time on. You might find that project that like, I need to learn a lot of things to do that. Like, you'll see all sorts of weird, crazy things at DEF CON. But I would make a huge recommendation if you go to something like DEF CON, don't go to any of the talks. Because the point of DEF CON is not to go to those talks. They're all recorded, and you can get them online later. So why spend the money to go spend a weekend in Las Vegas in the desert and to go spend all your time in these conference rooms? Like, that's not where the conference is happening. The conference is when you go meet people and you interact with people and you like participate in their little contest and you do random weird things. Like, even if you don't get a job out of it, you will network with people where somewhere down the line it will pay off. Where, like, to put it this way, I was on CNBC once, and I was part of this whole documentary they did on CNBC, and the only reason that ever happened was because of a friend that I made at DEF CON who remembered that I lived in Austin at the time and was like, oh, yeah, I know a guy in Austin, and so he recommended me for their documentary, and yeah, it's like, DEF CON is the conference to go to if you want to network and get a job in security or like weird hacker type things or pen testing or I mean like all layers of security you're going to find at DEF CON. You're going to find people who do physical pen testing, who can lockpick and break into stuff. You're going to find people who write exploits in real time. You're going to find people who know how to do cell phone jamming, or you'll see things wheeled around and you'll ask like, what's in that box? And they'll say like, oh, it's a cell phone tower. Like, just random weird things you find there. And you'll talk to people with all sorts of history, like stories to tell, and yeah, like instead of spending the $1,200-$1,500 to get a certificate in something, I would instead spend that money to go to Las Vegas and spend the weekend at DEF CON meeting people and just networking that way. That was the best decision I ever made early on.
That's how I met you, Yama.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Matt, for actually bringing the speaker to us. This is a chance for all of you in here. Paul, how many do we have now? We have 4, 7. We got 9 still. That's enough.
And then including the people on Discord. I don't know how many's on Discord.
But now's the time if you have any last minute questions, anything you're wondering about, any stories from Las Vegas you want to bake away from Mr.
You
John
don't want to
here.
hear them.
Oh, okay. But now is the time to ask. So does anyone have a question?
I had a question. Give me a second. I gotta remember what the question was.
All right.
Okay.
Answer my question then. All right. So, question. Okay. It sounds like you learned a lot by just doing small things. Like it sounded like whenever you were doing like the bot or something, you wanted to look at, for example, the streaming YouTube. You were like, well, I'm curious, right? And like you said, right, it probably wouldn't like matter, right? Like no one's gonna help from this app that you created, but it sounded like you learned a lot from doing that compared to just going on certificates or reading a book. It looks like you did things to learn rather than just read a textbook or go to a class or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much how, like, you, like, in your opinion, the best way to learn was just doing things, right?
Everybody's different. For me, that was definitely my way of learning, my preferred way of learning. Not to rag on college or anything, but I have a hard time sitting in class. Like, to this day, I hate doing homework. Like, if work gives me homework assignments, they're not getting done. Like, why would I do that? I like doing things on my own self-paced learning. I have to be interested in something to really absorb the information. If I'm just reading a book, like, it's not really going to sit in with me, and it's not hands-on experience. If I'm interested in something, then I'm motivated to retain that information. Maybe there's some psychology on that.
Okay.
All right. My Snapple is currently writing out a question, but while we wait for that, Matt, did you figure out what you had?
No, I'm just kidding. I got to pass this.
You have a question?
Yeah. I guess as someone who's about to graduate or a recent graduate, you said you do interviews, which is why I'm asking this question. But what's the most important thing I can have on my resume or my skill set that's going to impress you to hire me?
Well, what do you want to do? That's a better question, because that will tell you what you should put on a resume. Actually, a better way to answer this is go find the kind of job you want, or like think of the job title you want, and then go to LinkedIn and search for people with those job titles and look through their resumes. And that will tell you what you should have on yours. Not to say you should lie or make up stuff, but it'll tell you like the skills that they're looking for.
All right. Thank you for that. Does anyone else have any questions?
Are you hiring?
Yes, always. DevOps people. Zoom is always hiring though, constantly growing still. I think we have an intern program, and I think we might actually have a intern program on my team this summer. I'm not positive, but I think we might.
All right. He has a question. We're going to switch to my Snapple real quick because he finished. And I'm betting this is actually my group project person. Have you come across any random information you would share about encryption's relation to graph theory?
No, but if there's anything about encryption I would recommend looking into, which I don't think it's a solved problem yet. I think there's 2 or 3 different approaches they're trying to come down into to do it. It's called zero-proof cryptography. And if you know what zero-proof, so to give you an example of what zero-proof cryptography would mean, is you could have a database of everything could be encrypted in the database, and you could make a transaction on the database without ever having to decrypt anything and still validate that it's true. That's one application of zero-proof cryptography. Another would be allowing something like Bitcoin with a blockchain without ever having to have a solid record of me sending you money. You could send money to somebody and it would be just like cash in that it would be almost untraceable, because all you would need to do is prove that they got the money. Like, it's complicated stuff. Yeah, just look up zero-proof cryptography, and that is, I think, the most interesting stuff happening in cryptography, or that will happen in the next 100 years.
Thank you for that. You've given me a rabbit hole that I have to do now. All right, and we have a question from, raise your hand. You got another one?
So I guess from rephrasing my question from earlier, what's the most important thing I can put on my resume or skill that I can learn to get an internship with your team?
2. One would be like a programming language, like Python would be high, then followed by Go. That there's always going to be arguments about what language is preferred, Python or Go, and then terraform.
I think Go is Google.
Terraform would be high up there. Like scripting of some sort. So like Python, Go, Bash. I don't like to say Bash, because it's kind of one of those like implicit things. Like if you know how to use the command line in Linux, you kind of mostly know Bash already. So yes, I would say a programming language like Python or Go and Terraform. Terraform is free, so it's good to pick up. And you can get a free AWS account. Caveat, if you're going to learn AWS, the first thing you should do before ever creating something on AWS is figure out how to set up a cost alert.
Because you don't want to like be learning AWS and the next thing you know you have like
$1,000 bill or $80,000 bill. Like you want to stay within those free limits and only use the free resources they have to learn.
All right, thank you for that and for that warning. Does anyone have anything else?
So question, you've mentioned it many times, and I've been wanting to question it, but now it's the great time. What is Terraform? I literally have no idea what that is.
So JSON isn't the right way to describe it, but it's like you define objects. So in Terraform, I would say, I'm going to be using a lot of Amazon terms here, but I'll say something like, this is a load balancer in Terraform, and I'll define what the load balancer's name is, and maybe what firewall ports are open on it. And then in another block, I'll say, here's a bunch of servers, and they all go behind this load balancer. And in another block, I might say, this is the rule that goes in that load balancer, so this is the rule to route traffic on. Your Terraform automates all cloud deployment work. Terraform controls everything from what we call the VPC, which is the virtual private cloud. So it would control the creation of that all the way down to the smallest networking components. You would do things. I mean, you could do all sorts of crazy things with Terraform. Like myself, I build these images with Terraform that go into AWS, so that when we spin up like new servers in AWS, they all build off this image. And this is all kind of tied together with one project where it checks to see that the latest image is actually updated. If it's not, it updates the image. It's basically automation for infrastructure. You can go in AWS and hit the VPC button and create one and like create instances one at a time and all that. A better way of describing Terraform. Terraform is a way for us to automate infrastructure and to also do versioning on our infrastructure and to track changes. So that if something changes on our, like if some servers disappear out of the configuration for some reason, or there's a firewall port open, or a new security key shows up in the repository, because it's all versioned with Git, we can track who made that change, when it was made, why it was made, and it also allows us to roll back. So if we're on our master branch and we roll out a change and for some reason it breaks on production, we're able to quickly roll back the change and then just redeploy with Terraform, and it will automatically, roll back to the state it was before. In most cases, I mean, I'm not going to say that 100% of the time because there are edge cases where things break and you just have to go in and manually fix stuff. But yeah, I'm sure you can find like some quick. I'm sure there's like a Medium tutorial, or there's no end to the tutorials you can find for Terraform. But like maybe Terraform AWS tutorial would be a good Google search. And yeah, just creating something simple with Terraform, like I'm spinning up some servers and now I can connect to them, and that's all automated. It will be confusing at first, but I swear once you run it for the first time and everything builds, like you'll see immediately why it's so powerful. Like no joke, the first time you run Terraform on AWS and it spins up something and you get all that output that shows you what it's building, you'll be like, why would anybody do it by hand ever? That doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like you have a Linux kernel and you have all these different components that go into a Linux kernel. Like why would you go build them all one at a time versus having a makefile that ties it all together? Think of like Terraform as makefiles for servers.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for that. And that the makefiles really make sense because everyone here has had to use it when they go through their CS2 class. But all right.
Right, and makefiles like define the order of steps, right? And what step might depend on another step. It's exactly like that with Terraform. It's just you're automating a bunch of commands that in the back end, behind the scenes, are building out your infrastructure, all your servers and website, like web hosting and your storage and your databases and all the permissions and all that. All of that can be automated.
All right. Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions? Well,
I have one final one.
you do.
But
All right.
it's my final one because I want to actually like kind of use experience here. All right. So my last question is, you've used Scrum development. What about Scrum development? Like how if as it sounds like you're like a team lead in the Scrum development kind of thing, kind of like a Scrum master. It doesn't really get talked.
But go on. Sorry.
Like it sounds like you're some sort of like lead when you like it's because you like seen people's resumes. So I'm assuming that you're some sort of senior position already. So my question is, in Scrum development, like how do you divide tasks? Like how do you actually give person A this task and what that task does compared to B, right? Is it just this giant idea and then you divide the work, or is it like actually can be more complicated than that?
Yeah, so we started doing this new thing in Zoom where we just hired a new project manager. We didn't have one before, we were kind of winging it ourselves. But we have a project manager, and every 2 weeks we do these meetings where we go over the high-level tasks, like this is what needs to be done, and we go over the existing tickets over the next maybe 6 or 8 weeks of like this is the work that needs to be done over the next month or two, and at some point they've been assigned to somebody either based on like work that they will have previously done along the line and will have gotten to that point eventually, or just because they know more about a certain thing. So as to who gets divided out work, that's really, I wouldn't say arbitrary, but it depends on like what your skills are and what you've been working on already. Like you're not just going to get thrown in a random task for something you have no context in when somebody else has already been doing all the work on it. Like that wouldn't make any sense. And yeah, we basically dive into every single ticket and we say, does this ticket encapsulate all the work? And if this ticket has too much work in it, then how do we break up this ticket into more, and we divvy up the work? But really we have 2 week sprints, and I'm given maybe like 4 or 5 quote unquote tickets, and they're really high level tasks. And that's 2 weeks to finish. Like, I hate to say it, but like in some capacity, you can procrastinate if you know that you're really good at something, or that something won't take you very long. Because if you have 2 weeks to finish work that you know is going to take you about 5 hours total, why would you drag that 5 hours out? Like, this goes back into being happy, right? Like, how do you value your time? And I'm not a huge fan of finishing all the work so that you can be given more work and more work and more work. They will never just not give you work. This is just a rule of thumb about companies. They will never just allow you to have free time. So if you've ever seen the movie Alien, I don't know if you have, but there's a scene where like they're in the engine room and like the bridge calls down to the engine room and they're like, how long is it going to take to fix? And like they whisper to each other. He's like, how long? He's like, I don't know, like an hour or two. And he tells him, he's like, it's going to take 24 hours. Like, it's like, well, I have maybe 5 hours of work over 2 weeks, but why would I do more? Like, that's how our sprints are going to work. And another way of looking at it is, if I finished all my work very early on in the sprint, in order to try to get more work, like to try to get ahead of the sprints and try to grab more work from the future, what will inevitably end up happening is that I will 100% step on somebody else's toes or be waiting on somebody else regardless. Like that's how we divvy up work, so that it can all happen in parallel, so that when the next 2 weeks happen, as long as all the work has been done by everybody in the previous 2 weeks, then nobody will be blocked going forward from that. Like, we have parallel tasks where, there's no possible way that I could jump ahead and try to finish months of work just out of pure boredom, because there's so many unknowns and there's so much other work that is not my work that I'm depending on that needs to be done, and it all has to be done in a certain order. I would say that's the beauty of working remotely, and also working for somewhere like Zoom, and also especially working in DevOps. Like I said early on, there will be weeks where it's just non-stop work, where like I will be on the phone until 10 or 11 o'clock at night every night of the week, and I hate it. But then there are weeks where absolutely nothing is happening, and I feel like, okay, I've maybe done like an hour of work this week, and then that imposter syndrome kicks in. You're like, well, do I need to be here? Like, it's only an hour of work, etc. But it's not those days you should focus on. It's the ones where you are super busy. Like, it's those days in which all your skills like all come in at one point, and you need to fix something, and all the pressure is on you, and you know you've got it because you know how to do the thing. It's those days that validate, at least for me, it validates how I feel about working somewhere. Like, oh, I am useful if I can, like, I was needed for this thing and only I could do this thing, so I feel useful. Like, that kind of validates that and helps with that imposter syndrome.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. Last round. You got a question? One once, one twice. Sold to Mr. John Rumion. I know I keep messing up the pronunciation. I'm sorry.
Just call him.
Yeah. Well, sorry for rambling too. I know you guys have somewhere to be tonight.
Yeah. Well, thank you for allowing us to listen to the ramble, though, because some of us, because we appreciate it. So everyone, give a round of applause.
Wow. Now his own friend doesn't give him a round of applause.
All right. And you have a good night, sir. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Have a good 420. Cheers.
Later, Yama.